They say a mother's love is unconditional, but what happens when that love becomes a weapon used against you? I'm Sarah, and for 16 years I believed that being the perfect mother meant sacrificing everything for my daughter Emma. I gave up my dreams, my career, my identity, all for her happiness. I thought love meant saying yes to everything, doing everything, being everything she needed. I was wrong. The day my 16-year-old daughter looked me in the eyes and told me she wanted to live with her father and stepmother permanently, I felt something inside me die. Not because she chose them, but because of what she said next. "Mom, Jessica understands me in ways you never could. She's successful, she's beautiful, and she actually makes Dad happy. Maybe if you tried harder to be more like her, you wouldn't be so alone." Those words shattered me more than any divorce papers ever could. My own daughter, the child I had carried, nursed, stayed up countless nights with, saw me as the inferior woman, the consolation prize, the one who wasn't good enough. That night, as I lay in my cramped apartment listening to the neighbors argue through paper-thin walls, my heart gave out. Literally. The doctor said it was stress-induced cardiac arrest, but I knew better. It was a broken heart that finally stopped beating. But death wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in our old kitchen, the one with the yellow walls I had painted myself when Emma was 5. The calendar on the refrigerator showed a date, 8 years in the past. 8-year-old Emma sat at our kitchen table, her dark hair in pigtails, struggling with fraction homework and crying because she couldn't understand why 1/2 was bigger than 1/3. This time, I knew exactly what was coming. I knew about Jessica Rivera, the kindergarten teacher who would steal my husband's heart and turn my daughter against me. I knew about the lies, the manipulation, the slow erosion of everything I thought was sacred. I knew how it would end. But I also knew something else. I knew I didn't have to let it happen the same way twice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Part 1, The Foundation of Sacrifice. My name is Sarah Chen Mitchell, though back then I was just Sarah Chen, a 22-year-old art student at UC Riverside, with paint permanently embedded under my fingernails and dreams of opening my own gallery someday. I met David during my senior year at a coffee shop near campus, where I was sketching strangers for pocket money. He was 25, recently graduated with an accounting degree, and everything I thought I wanted in a man. Stable, responsible, ready to build a life. He would sit in the corner booth every Tuesday and Thursday, nursing a black coffee and working on spreadsheets. I started drawing him without him knowing, capturing the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated, the unconscious way he tapped his pen against his lip when he was thinking. When I finally worked up the courage to show him the sketches, his face lit up with a wonder I had never seen before. "You made me look important," he said, tracing the lines with his finger. "Like I matter." That should have been my first clue. David didn't see art as expression or beauty or truth. He saw it as transformation, as the power to make something ordinary appear extraordinary. He fell in love with what I could create, not who I was. We married 6 months after graduation in a small ceremony at my parents' house in Chinatown. I wore my grandmother's jade bracelet and a second-hand dress I had altered myself. David's parents flew in from Phoenix, his father a bank manager, his mother a real estate agent, and spent the entire reception discussing property values and investment portfolios. My parents, who ran a small restaurant and spoke broken English, smiled politely and nodded at conversations they couldn't follow. I should have noticed then how different our worlds were, how David's family measured worth in stock options and square footage, while mine measured it in family dinners and handwritten letters. But I was young and in love, convinced that our differences would make us stronger. We moved to Riverside, into a starter home in a planned community where every house looked identical, except for the color of the shutters. David got a job at a mid-sized accounting firm downtown, and I took a position at a local advertising agency, doing layout design for grocery store flyers and car dealership ads. It wasn't the artistic career I had dreamed of, but it paid well, and we had goals. A bigger house. A family. A future that looked like the magazine spreads David would tear out and tape to our refrigerator. Emma came 2 years later, after 18 months of trying and 3 early miscarriages that we never talked about afterward. When the doctor placed her in my arms, her tiny fist wrapped around my finger, I understood for the first time what people meant when they said love could physically hurt. The intensity of it was overwhelming. This fierce, protective instinct that made every decision suddenly revolve around her well-being. David seemed equally smitten. He would spend hours just watching her sleep, marveling at her perfect tiny fingernails and the way she would scrunch her face when she dreamed. "She's going to be brilliant," he would whisper. "Look at those eyes. She's already planning her next move." But somewhere between the sleepless nights and the endless cycle of feeding, changing, and soothing, I started to disappear. Not all at once, but gradually, like watercolors bleeding together until the original image becomes unrecognizable. My easel gathered dust in the garage. My art supplies sat in boxes, forgotten. When Emma cried, I dropped everything to comfort her. When David needed clean shirts for work, I ironed them at midnight. When our friends invited us out, I stayed home, because finding a babysitter felt too complicated. "You're such a natural at this," David would say, watching me bounce Emma on my hip while stirring dinner with my free hand. "I don't know how you make it look so easy." I took his words as praise, not recognizing them for what they really were, an excuse to let me handle everything while he maintained the life he had before. He still went to happy hours with colleagues. He still played golf on weekends. He still pursued promotions and raises, and the approval of his supervisors. Meanwhile, I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, and consider a hot meal a luxury. When Emma started walking, I baby-proofed the entire house, covering sharp corners and installing locks on every cabinet. When she began talking, I documented every word in a journal, convinced that her vocabulary was far advanced for her age. When she showed interest in coloring, I bought her the expensive art supplies and spent hours teaching her about color theory and composition. "You're turning her into a mini-you," David would joke, but there was an edge to his voice that I didn't understand then. He wanted Emma to excel, but not in the same direction I had. He enrolled her in soccer and swimming lessons. He bought her junior microscopes and math workbooks. When she drew pictures, he would ask her to explain what they meant, instead of simply appreciating the joy she took in creating them. By the time Emma started kindergarten, I had voluntarily become the mother I thought she needed. I quit my job at the advertising agency to be more available for school pickup and sick days. I joined the PTA and volunteered for every field trip and classroom party. I learned to make elaborate baked goods for fundraisers and spent my evenings cutting out construction paper decorations for themed events. Our house became the neighborhood gathering place. Emma's friends loved coming over because I always had homemade snacks and craft supplies ready. I knew every child's dietary restrictions and personality quirks. Other mothers would drop their kids off with relief, knowing I would handle whatever arose. "You're amazing," they would tell me. "I don't know how you do it all." But David was changing too, in ways I was too busy to notice at first. He started working longer hours, staying late for meetings and weekend projects. He joined a gym and began a strict workout routine. He updated his wardrobe, trading his casual khakis for tailored pants and expensive button-down shirts. He bought cologne and used hair products, and started caring about his appearance in ways he never had before. "I want to look professional," he explained when I commented on his new clothes. "Image matters in business. You understand that, right? You're the one who taught me about visual presentation." I did understand. I understood so well that I started seeing my own appearance through his eyes. The yoga pants and oversized sweaters that had become my uniform suddenly felt frumpy and tired. My hair, which I kept in a practical ponytail most days, looked unkempt compared to the styled cuts of the other mothers at Emma's school. I had gained weight since Emma's birth and never lost it, too busy caring for everyone else to prioritize my own health. When David suggested I cut my long hair into something more manageable, I made the appointment without question. When he bought me a gym membership for my birthday, I thanked him and promised to use it more regularly. When he criticized my cooking or housekeeping, I worked harder to meet his standards. I thought I was being a good wife, adapting and improving to make our family stronger. Emma was 7 when I first heard the name Jessica Rivera. David mentioned her casually, describing her as a teacher at one of the elementary schools in his firm's district. They had met during a school audit, and he was impressed by her dedication to her students and her innovative classroom management techniques. "She's really making a difference," he said over dinner. "Her classroom is like something out of a magazine. Everything perfectly organized, color-coded, beautiful. The kids adore her." Emma looked up from her spaghetti. "Is she pretty?" David paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "I suppose so. But more importantly, she's smart and passionate about education." I felt a strange flutter in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. David often talked about people he met through work. It was natural for him to be impressed by someone who excelled in their field. I was being paranoid and insecure. But over the following weeks, Jessica's name came up more frequently. David would mention her creative bulletin boards, her innovative teaching methods, her dedication to professional development. He started coming home with ideas about how Emma could improve academically, suggestions that always seemed to originate from his conversations with Jessica. "Jessica says that children Emma's age should be reading at least 30 minutes every night," he would tell me, "and she thinks we should limit screen time more strictly. These things really impact cognitive development." I bristled at the implication that I wasn't already prioritizing Emma's education, but I implemented every suggestion without argument. When David said Jessica recommended a particular math workbook series, I bought them immediately. When he mentioned that Jessica's students were learning Spanish through immersion techniques, I researched local programs and enrolled Emma in weekend classes. Slowly, I began to feel like I was being compared to a standard I couldn't see or understand. Jessica Rivera became a phantom presence in our house, her methods and opinions influencing decisions about my own daughter's upbringing. I started second-guessing choices I had felt confident about, wondering if I was doing enough, being enough, giving enough. Emma seemed to sense the shift in our household's dynamics. She became more anxious about her performance in school, asking constantly if her grades were good enough, and if her teachers liked her. She started comparing herself to other children more frequently, worrying that she wasn't as smart or talented as her classmates. "Mommy," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "do you think I'm special?" The question broke my heart. "Of course you're special, sweetheart. You're the most wonderful little girl in the world." "But how do you know? How can you tell if someone is really special, or just thinks they are?" I sat on the edge of her bed, searching for the right words. "Special doesn't mean better than other people, Emma. It means unique. You have your own gifts and talents and ways of seeing the world that nobody else has. That's what makes you special to me." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She nodded solemnly, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. At 7 years old, she was already learning to measure her worth through external validation, and I realized with growing horror that I had been teaching her that lesson through my own behavior. The phone calls started shortly after that conversation. David would step outside to take them, or disappear into his home office with the door closed. When I asked who had called, he would give vague answers about work projects or consulting opportunities. His phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter, now stayed in his pocket or face down on surfaces where I couldn't see the screen. I told myself I was being paranoid. Marriage required trust, and I had no concrete reason to doubt David's faithfulness. He was a good father and a reliable provider. He had never given me cause to question his commitment to our family. The suspicious feelings growing in my chest were probably just symptoms of new mother anxiety and the natural insecurities that came with feeling less attractive than I used to be. But late at night, when David thought I was sleeping, I would hear him texting. The soft glow of his phone screen would illuminate his face in the darkness, and I would see him smiling at messages in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. When I asked him about it in the morning, he would claim he had been checking work emails or reading news articles. "You know how my mind races when I'm trying to fall asleep," he would say. "Sometimes I need to clear my head before I can relax." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The alternative was too terrifying to consider. If David was lying to me, if he was having an emotional affair, or worse, then everything I had built my life around was an illusion. The perfect family I had sacrificed my career and dreams for would be revealed as a performance, and I would be left with nothing but the role I had created for myself, a role that apparently wasn't enough to keep my husband's attention. So I worked harder. I lost the weight I had gained after Emma's birth. I scheduled regular hair appointments and started wearing makeup again. I bought new clothes that were more flattering and made an effort to be more available when David came home from work. I planned date nights and surprise dinners and tried to recapture the romance we had shared in our early years together. For a while, it seemed to work. David appeared more attentive and affectionate. He complimented my appearance and seemed more interested in spending time together as a family. But I could feel the effort it required from him, the conscious decision he had to make to focus on us instead of whatever was pulling his attention elsewhere. Emma thrived during this period. With both her parents making a renewed effort to be present and engaged, she blossomed academically and socially. Her teachers praised her creativity and enthusiasm. Her artwork became more sophisticated and confident. She made new friends and seemed genuinely happy most of the time. Looking back now, with the clarity that comes from lived experience and hindsight, I can see that this was the calm before the storm. David was trying to convince himself that he could have both the stability and security of our marriage and the excitement of his emotional connection with Jessica. He was testing whether he could return to being satisfied with the life we had built together. But some lines, once crossed, change everything, and David had already crossed his. The end of my first life was still 8 years away, but the foundation was already cracking. I just couldn't see the fractures yet because I was too busy trying to be perfect, trying to be enough, trying to hold everything together through sheer force of will and unconditional love. In my second life, standing in that kitchen with the knowledge of everything that was to come, I finally understood the truth that had eluded me for so long. Love isn't about sacrifice. Real love, the kind that sustains and nourishes and grows, requires honesty, respect, and mutual investment. It requires two people who choose each other every day, not out of obligation or convenience, but because they genuinely value what they build together. I had spent my first life trying to earn love through service, never realizing that love earned through sacrifice isn't really love at all. It's just another form of transaction. And like all transactions, it only lasts as long as both parties believe they're getting a fair deal. This time, I was going to teach Emma something different. I was going to show her what real love looked like. Not the kind that disappears when someone prettier or more convenient comes along, but the kind that exists because two people choose to see and value each other's authentic selves. But first, I had to remember who my authentic self actually was. After so many years of being who everyone else needed me to be, I had forgotten the woman who used to paint strangers in coffee shops and dream of owning her own gallery. I had forgotten that I was more than just a mother and wife. I was an artist, a dreamer, a person with my own desires and ambitions and right to happiness. That woman was still inside me somewhere, buried under years of compromise and self-sacrifice. And this time I was going to let her breathe. The truth hit me like ice water on a summer day, sudden and breathtaking in its cruelty. It was Emma's 8th birthday, and I had spent weeks planning what I thought would be the perfect celebration. I had hand-painted invitations featuring her favorite cartoon characters, spent 3 days baking and decorating a 3-tier princess castle cake, and transformed our backyard into a fairy tale wonderland, with streamers, balloons, and a treasure hunt I had designed myself. David had promised to leave work early to help with the setup, but as usual, an urgent client meeting ran late. I was rushing around, hanging the last of the decorations while Emma napped, when his phone rang on the kitchen counter. He had forgotten it in his hurry to get to the office that morning, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. The ringtone played Jessica's name across the screen in bold letters, and beneath it, a photo I had never seen before. Jessica Rivera stood on a beach somewhere tropical, her blonde hair catching the sunset, wearing a flowing white dress that made her look like something from a magazine. But it wasn't just any photo. It was clearly a screenshot from a video call, intimate and personal in a way that made my stomach drop. I stood frozen, staring at the phone as it continued to ring. When it finally went silent, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was a work call. Maybe David had simply updated his contacts with professional photos. Maybe there was an innocent explanation that I couldn't see because I was tired and stressed from party preparations. But then the phone chimed with a text message, and the preview appeared on the locked screen. "Missing you already, my love. Last night was perfect. Can't wait until you can stay the whole weekend." The words swam in front of my eyes as their meanings sank in. My husband, the father of my child, the man I had rebuilt my entire life around, was having an affair, not just an emotional connection or a workplace friendship that had gotten too close. A full relationship, complete with overnight stays and endearments, and a level of intimacy that belonged to us. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my legs suddenly unable to support me. How long had this been going on? How many of his late nights and weekend work sessions had been lies? How many times had he come home to me and Emma after being with her, kissing me goodnight with lips that had spoken love to another woman? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization of how blind I had been, how willingly I had accepted every excuse and explanation. I had been so focused on being the perfect wife and mother that I had stopped paying attention to whether David was being a decent husband and father in return. Another text arrived. Emma's party is today, right? Poor Sarah, she has no idea how miserable she's making everyone with all her over-planning. That child would be so much happier with less pressure and more freedom. I stared at the message, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Jessica wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was discussing my parenting, analyzing my relationship with my daughter, inserting herself into the most sacred parts of my life. And David was apparently agreeing with her criticisms, sharing details about our family with someone who had no right to judge us. A third message followed quickly. I can't wait to meet her properly. She sounds like such a sweet girl. I think she would love the art classes I teach at the community center. Much more creative than those rigid academic activities Sarah insists on. The presumption was staggering. This woman, who had never met my daughter, was already planning activities for her, already positioning herself as a better mother figure than the one Emma actually had. And David was encouraging this fantasy, this gradual takeover of our family structure. I heard Emma stirring upstairs, her afternoon nap coming to an end, just as her friends would start arriving for the party. In an hour, our backyard would be filled with 8-year-olds running around in princess costumes, playing games I had designed, and eating cake I had made with my own hands. Emma would be the center of attention, surrounded by friends who genuinely loved her and parents who respected the effort I had put into creating a magical day. But now I would have to smile and chat and pretend that everything was normal while my world collapsed around me. I would have to watch David play the role of devoted father and loving husband while knowing that he was counting the minutes until he could text Jessica back, until he could continue the relationship that was slowly destroying mine. The doorbell rang and I could hear Emma's feet hitting the floor upstairs as she woke up completely. The first party guests were arriving and I had a choice to make. I could confront David immediately, create a scene that would ruin Emma's birthday, and force conversations I wasn't ready to have. Or I could compartmentalize, file this information away for later processing, and focus on giving my daughter the celebration she deserved. I chose Emma. I always chose Emma. For the next 3 hours, I performed the role of happy hostess with an Oscar-worthy commitment. I supervised games, served cake, took pictures, and made sure every child felt included and special. Parents complimented the decorations and asked for my party planning tips. Emma glowed with joy, telling everyone about the treasure hunt and showing off her new dress. David arrived halfway through the party, full of apologies and explanations about the client meeting that had run long. He jumped right into father mode, helping with cleanup and charming the other parents with stories about Emma's latest accomplishments. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect family hosting the perfect party. But I could see him differently now. I noticed how often he checked his phone, how his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me, how he positioned himself physically so that we were rarely standing close together. He was present in body but absent in every way that mattered, going through the motions of family life while his heart was clearly elsewhere. After the last guest left and Emma had gone to bed, exhausted and happy from her special day, David and I cleaned up in relative silence. He was cheerful and talkative, recounting funny moments from the party and praising my organizational skills. It was the most animated I had seen him in months, and I realized with sick clarity that his good mood came from knowing he would soon be able to contact Jessica again. "Great party, Sarah," he said as we folded up the last of the tables. "Emma looks so happy. You really outdid yourself with all the details." "Thank you," I replied, my voice sounding normal even though my throat felt tight. "I just want her to have good memories of being a kid." "She will. he assured me, and for a moment his expression softened with what looked like genuine affection. "You're a good mother. Whatever else happens, Emma is lucky to have you." The phrasing struck me as odd. Whatever else happens. As if he already knew that changes were coming. That our family structure was about to shift in ways that would test Emma's sense of security. As if he was already preparing for a future where I would need to be consoled about being a good mother, because I wouldn't be a wife anymore. That night I lay awake listening to David's breathing beside me, wondering when he had become a stranger. The man I had married would never have betrayed our family this way. The David the First fell in love with valued loyalty and honesty and commitment. But people change, and sometimes they change into people you can't recognize anymore. I thought about Jessica's messages, about her casual dismissal of my parenting style and her eagerness to step into my role. I thought about all the times David had come home with suggestions about Emma's education or activities, recommendations that I now realized were coming from another woman who had never even met my daughter. I thought about how I had implemented every suggestion without question, how I had let a stranger influence decisions about my own child's upbringing. But mostly, I thought about Emma, my beautiful, trusting 8-year-old, who believed that her family was stable and secure, that her parents loved each other and would always be there for her. How would I protect her from the storm that was coming? How would I explain that Daddy had found someone he liked better than Mommy? Someone who made him happier and more excited about life. The phone buzzed on David's nightstand, and I watched him reach for it automatically. Muscle memory from months of secret communication. The screen lit up with another message from Jessica, and even though I couldn't read the words from my position, I could see David's face change as he read them. His expression softened with affection and anticipation, the same look he used to get when he read messages from me during our early courtship. He typed back quickly, then deleted and retyped his response several times before sending it. After a few minutes, another message arrived, and this pattern continued for nearly an hour. I lay perfectly still, pretending to sleep, watching my husband conduct a relationship that had nothing to do with the life we had built together. When he finally put the phone down and settled back into bed, I felt him relax in a way he never did after conversations with me anymore. He fell asleep quickly, deeply the sleep of someone whose emotional needs were being met elsewhere. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, processing the magnitude of what I had discovered. My marriage was over, even if David hadn't worked up the courage to end it officially yet. He was already living a double life, already planning a future with someone else. I was just the placeholder, the convenient caretaker who managed his home and daughter while he explored his real happiness with Jessica. The revelation was devastating, but it was also clarifying. For months I had been trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I couldn't seem to make David happy anymore, why our connection felt so distant and strained. Now I knew the truth. It wasn't anything I had done wrong or failed to do right. It was simply that he had found someone else, someone who represented a different kind of life than the one we had built together. But knowing the truth didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it made the betrayal more acute, because I could see now how long it had been going on, how many lies I had believed, how thoroughly I had been excluded from my own life. Part 3. The Allies Become Enemies. The aftermath of Emma's birthday party marked the beginning of what I now recognize as the slow poisoning of my most important relationships. David didn't confess his affair that night, or the next week, or even the next month. Instead, he began a careful campaign of emotional manipulation designed to make me the villain in our marriage story, setting the stage for his eventual exit, while preserving his image as the wronged party. It started with small criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. David would come home from work and notice things that had never bothered him before. The way I had organized Emma's school supplies, the dinner I had chosen to prepare, the clothes I had picked out for myself. Nothing was ever wrong enough to spark a real argument, but everything carried the subtle implication that my judgment was questionable, that my choices were somehow inferior to what a better wife would have made. I was talking to Jessica about reading comprehension strategies, he said one evening as I helped Emma with her homework. She mentioned that kids Emma's age should be reading chapter books independently by now. Maybe we should move away from the picture books and challenge her more academically. Emma looked up from her math worksheet, confusion clouding her features. But I like picture books, Daddy. Mommy and I read them together at bedtime. Of course you like them, sweetheart, David said, his tone gentle but patronizing. But liking something isn't the same as what's best for your education. Mommy wants you to be happy, but sometimes being happy and being challenged are different things. I felt my chest tighten with anger and hurt. Emma was reading well above grade level and had always been eager to tackle new books. Our bedtime reading routine wasn't about her academic limitations. It was about maintaining our connection and sharing stories that sparked conversations about life and values. But David was reframing it as evidence of my failure to push Emma toward her potential. Emma is doing beautifully with her reading, I said, keeping my voice steady. Her teacher says she's one of the strongest readers in her class. Of course she is, David agreed quickly. I'm not criticizing her progress. I just think we could be more strategic about setting goals for continued growth. Jessica has some great insights about individualized learning plans. There it was again. Jessica's expertise, Jessica's insights. Jessica's superior understanding of child development. I wanted to scream that Jessica had never met our daughter, had never spent a single night nursing her through an illness, or helping her work through a friendship problem, or listening to her fears about starting a new school year. But Emma was sitting right there, absorbing every word of this conversation, learning that Daddy's teacher friend knew more about her needs than her own mother did. The pattern escalated over the following weeks. David would come home with new opinions about Emma's extracurricular activities, her bedtime routine, her social development, her screen time limits. Every suggestion was presented as research-based wisdom from the brilliant Jessica Rivera, and every aspect of my parenting was subtly questioned and found lacking. Emma began to internalize these messages in ways that broke my heart. She would ask me why we didn't do things the way Jessica's students did them. She would question whether the books I chose for her were good enough, whether the activities I planned were educational enough, whether the rules I set were reasonable compared to what other children her age were allowed to do. Mommy, she said one afternoon as we worked on an art project together, Daddy says Jessica teaches kids how to make really professional artwork, like museum quality. Do you think my paintings are good enough for a museum? I looked at her earnest little face, so eager for reassurance, so unconsciously cruel in her innocence. Your paintings are beautiful, Emma. Art isn't about being good enough for museums. It's about expressing yourself and finding joy in creating something that didn't exist before. But wouldn't it be cool if they were museum good? She pressed. Maybe Jessica could teach me some techniques that would make them better. This was how it happened. Not through dramatic confrontations or obvious manipulation, but through the slow erosion of confidence in tiny daily interactions. Emma was learning to see me as someone whose love was unconditional, but whose expertise was questionable. She was learning that there were better ways to do things, more professional approaches, more sophisticated standards that I either couldn't or wouldn't provide. David, meanwhile, was positioning himself as the parent who wanted the best for Emma, who was willing to seek out expert advice and implement evidence-based strategies. I was being cast as the parent who prioritized sentiment over substance, who let love cloud my judgment about what was truly beneficial. The financial pressure began around the same time. David had always managed our money, and I had been grateful to let him handle that responsibility while I focused on Emma and the household. But suddenly, every purchase I made was scrutinized and questioned. The organic groceries I bought were unnecessary luxuries. The art supplies I purchased for Emma's projects were wasteful when the school provided adequate materials. The book club membership I had maintained for years was an indulgence we could no longer afford. We need to be more mindful about spending, David explained during one of our increasingly tense dinner conversations. Emma will need college savings, and my firm is talking about potential layoffs. We should probably cut back on non-essential expenses. Non-essential expenses, it turned out, were defined as anything that brought me joy or independence. My yoga classes were canceled because the monthly fee was too high. My subscription to art magazines was deemed unnecessary when I could get the same information online. Even my weekly coffee dates with other mothers from Emma's school were discouraged as wasteful spending that could be redirected toward family goals. But David's expenses remained untouched. His gym membership, his golf outings with colleagues, his expensive lunches with clients. These were all investments in his career and therefore essential to our family's future stability. Only my personal spending was subject to this new austerity, and only my activities were reframed as selfish indulgences that took resources away from Emma's needs. I began to feel like a guest in my own life, someone whose presence was tolerated but whose preferences were inconvenient. Every decision became a negotiation where David held all the cards, and every conversation carried the subtext that my judgment was flawed and my priorities were misplaced. Emma absorbed these dynamics with the keen sensitivity that children have for family undercurrents. She began coming to David first with questions and problems, seeking his approval before asking for things she wanted. When I helped her with homework, she would double-check my answers with David later. When I made plans for weekend activities, she would ask if Daddy thought they were good ideas. The most painful moments came when Emma would unconsciously repeat David's criticisms of me, not out of malice but out of genuine confusion about conflicting messages she was receiving. She would ask me why I didn't dress as nicely as other mothers, why I didn't work outside the home like Jessica did, why I seemed sad so much lately when we had such a good life. "Daddy says you used to be different," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed. "He says you used to care more about how you looked and doing exciting things. Why did you change, Mommy?" I sat on the edge of her bed, struggling to find words that would be honest without being damaging. How could I explain that I hadn't changed so much as adapted? That I had shaped myself around the needs of our family and somehow lost track of who I was underneath all that adaptation? How could I tell her that her father was rewriting our history to justify his current unhappiness, making me responsible for his dissatisfaction with the life we had built together? "People grow and change as they get older, sweetheart," I said finally. "Sometimes what makes us happy changes too. I'm very happy taking care of you and our family. That might be different from how I was before, but it's not worse." "But wouldn't you be happier if you were more like Jessica?" Emma asked with devastating innocence. "Daddy says she's really good at everything." I felt something break inside me at that moment. My 8-year-old daughter, the most important person in my world, was suggesting that I would be improved by becoming more like my husband's mistress. She didn't know the full truth of what she was saying, but the message was clear. I was inadequate as I was, and there was a better version of motherhood and womanhood available if I would just try harder to achieve it. "I think I'm pretty good at the things that matter most," I told her, kissing her forehead, "like loving you and making sure you know how special you are." "I know you love me, Mommy," she said, snuggling into her pillow. "I just want you to be happy too." After she fell asleep, I stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her peaceful face in the dim light from the hallway. She was worried about my happiness, this little girl who should be focused on her own childhood joys and discoveries. Somehow, the adults in her life had made our emotional well-being her responsibility, and she was trying to fix problems she didn't understand and shouldn't have to carry. David found me there an hour later, still standing in Emma's doorway, lost in thought. "She's worried about you," he said quietly. "She asks me if you're okay, if there's something wrong that she doesn't understand." I turned to look at him, this man I had loved and trusted and built a life with, who was now using our daughter's concern for me as another way to highlight my inadequacy. "Maybe she's worried because she can sense tension between us. Kids are perceptive about family dynamics." "What tension?" he asked, and his tone carried just enough surprise to make me question my own perceptions. "I think you might be overthinking things, Sarah. Emma's fine. We're fine. Maybe you're projecting your own anxieties onto her." This was the gaslighting that would define the next several months of our marriage. Every problem I identified was reframed as my imagination or my emotional instability. Every concern I raised was evidence of my tendency to create drama where none existed. David never directly denied my feelings, but he consistently suggested that my interpretation of events was skewed by my own psychological issues. I began to doubt myself in ways that felt dangerous and disorienting. Maybe I was being paranoid about David's phone calls and late nights. Maybe I was reading too much into Jessica's influence on his parenting suggestions. Maybe I was so insecure about my own adequacy as a wife and mother that I was creating enemies where none existed. But then I would remember Jessica's text messages. the intimate tone and casual cruelty of her comments about me and Emma. I would remember the photo of her on David's phone, the way his face lit up when he read her messages, the obvious affection and excitement he felt when communicating with her. Those things were real, not products of my imagination or evidence of my emotional instability. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest part of this phase. David systematically undermined my relationships with the people who might have supported me through this crisis. He would make subtle comments to other parents about my stress levels and emotional volatility. He would decline social invitations on our behalf, explaining that I was going through a difficult period and wasn't really up for social interaction. When friends called to check on me, David would answer and update them on my mental state with concerned authority. "Sarah's been struggling lately," he would say. "I think she's having trouble adjusting to Emma getting older and needing her less. It's been hard for her to find her identity outside of motherhood." These conversations, which I only learned about later, painted me as unstable and fragile, someone whose perceptions couldn't be trusted, and whose emotional needs were exhausting for those around me. By the time I realized what was happening, many of my friendships had become strained and awkward, with people treating me like a delicate mental health case rather than a peer going through marital difficulties. The final blow came when Emma's teacher requested a parent conference to discuss some behavioral changes she had noticed in the classroom. Emma had become withdrawn and anxious, her usual confidence replaced by constant self-doubt and need for reassurance. She was asking her teacher whether her work was good enough, whether her friends really liked her, whether her family was normal compared to other families. David and I sat in tiny plastic chairs in Emma's classroom while Mrs. Rodriguez explained her concerns with gentle professionalism. "Emma is a wonderful student," she assured us, "but I've noticed some changes in her emotional regulation and self-confidence over the past few months. She seems worried about meeting expectations and very concerned about adult approval." I felt my heart sink as I recognized the symptoms. Emma was absorbing the stress and uncertainty in our household, internalizing the message that love and acceptance were conditional on performance and compliance. "Has anything changed at home?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked carefully. "Sometimes children reflect family stress in their school behavior." I opened my mouth to speak, but David was faster. "Things have been a little stressful lately," he admitted. "Sarah's been going through a difficult time emotionally, and I think Emma picks up on that anxiety. We're working on it." The teacher nodded sympathetically and focused her attention on me. "It's so common for mothers to struggle with identity transitions as children become more independent," she said kindly. "Emma talks about you often and clearly adores you. Sometimes our own self-doubt can transmit to our children, even when we don't mean for it to." I sat there, listening to my daughter's teacher inadvertently participate in David's narrative about my mental health struggles, and realized how completely I had been isolated. Even this woman, who cared about Emma and wanted to help, was seeing me through the lens David had created. I was the unstable mother, whose personal problems were affecting her child, not the wife whose husband was having an affair and systematically destroying her support system. "What can we do to help Emma feel more secure?" I asked, forcing myself to focus on the only thing that really mattered. "Consistency and reassurance," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "Children need to know that their family is stable and that adult problems aren't their responsibility to solve. Maybe family counseling would be helpful for working through this transition period." David nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great suggestion. I've been thinking Sarah might benefit from professional support." There it was again. The implication that I was the problem, I was the one who needed fixing, I was the reason our family was struggling. And now it was coming from Emma's teacher, wrapped in professional concern and genuine care for my daughter's well-being. As we walked to the car after the conference, I felt the full weight of my isolation settle around me like a suffocating blanket. My husband was having an affair and had convinced everyone that I was mentally unstable. My daughter was absorbing anxiety that came from problems she couldn't understand or solve. My support system had been systematically eroded through careful manipulation and well-intentioned concern for my psychological state. I was completely alone, surrounded by people who claimed to love me but saw me as broken and unreliable. And the most terrifying part was that I was starting to believe them. Maybe I was paranoid and unstable. Maybe I was projecting my insecurities onto innocent situations. Maybe David was right that I needed professional help to work through my emotional issues. But that night, as I lay awake listening to David text with Jessica again, I knew that my perceptions were accurate and my instincts were sound. The problem wasn't my mental health. The problem was that I was living in a house of lies, trying to maintain a marriage with someone who had already emotionally divorced me, trying to protect a daughter who was being taught to see me as the weak link in our family chain. Something had to change. Either I would find the strength to fight back against this systematic destruction of my sense of reality, or I would disappear entirely into the role of the crazy wife whose breakdown explained away all the cracks in our perfect family facade. I chose to fight back. But I had no idea how much more I would lose before I learned how to win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.